Today on Kinwise Conversations, we're joined by Brian Jefferson, a professor at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business. After a successful career in multinational taxation at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Brian transitioned to academia, where he has pioneered the use of artificial intelligence in his ethics and accounting classes long before it became a mainstream topic. If you've ever wondered how to move your students from fearing AI to using it for cognitive enhancement, how to co-create a custom AI with your class to build excitement and ownership, or how to prepare the next generation for a workforce where their first job might be to audit work they've never performed themselves, you're in the right place. Hi, Brian. I'm really excited to hear about how you've been navigating this evolving landscape in education. We know that AI is changing things, and I'm curious about what has your journey been like and what has drawn you to think about how AI shows up in your work as an educator at the University of Maryland?
Hi, Lydia. First, thank you for having me on today. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic. I'm very passionate about it for the future of our students and for the future of business as well. As you said, I'm now an educator at the University of Maryland. A bit of background on me for your listeners. I was formerly a student at the University of Maryland, and I was lucky enough early on in that journey to get to have two internships with a job that ultimately became my career. And so after leaving the University of Maryland, I worked for over 20 years for a large accounting firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I eventually became a partner and an owner. And 3 years ago, I decided that I wanted a new challenge and I left PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was so lucky in that my former alma mater, University of Maryland, had an opening for a need in my area of technical expertise, which is multinational taxation. But also, I felt very fortunate to be able to jump right in and teach ethics related classes. Really were some of the first sparks for me of how important 3 years ago AI was going to be as I started to bring that into the classroom.
It's interesting because 3 years ago, the conversation about AI was just in its infancy. You mentioned ethics. Was that the reason why you started paying attention to AI because you were teaching an ethics class, or was there another reason?
That's a great question. My students would probably tell you that I'm a pretty voracious reader. And so this would have been January 2.5 years ago. Those of us that were not so in the know about what was going on in the AI space started to see more and more advancements, particularly coming out of OpenAI and some of the things that they were doing. And so in my classes, I started to use it just as a discussion point around, are we reading the right things that we're gathering information? And so I started raising some of these questions about, have you read the latest breakthroughs over at OpenAI? And then not hearing enough back on that, I started to try to make it more practical. One of the first discussion points that I brought into my ethics class was asking them what they thought of, and Lydia, I don't know if you'll remember this. I think it's probably still around, but there was a product called Lensa, and Lensa basically would let you upload a number of your photographs and it would stylize them. It would give you back 100 images of Lydia on the surface of the moon, where, so really putting you in really interesting scenarios. And some of that seems very basic now, but 2.5 years ago, it was really sort of mind blowing what you could do in such a short period of time. So that sparked a really great conversation with my students around artistic integrity and property rights. And that just started the discussion around AI. And then by the end of that first semester, my students were at least having discussions in ethics and doing elevator pitches on where AI might go. But it does, as you said, seem like forever ago because we've experienced so much change in business, in the educational space, in our portfolios based on the advancement of AI.
It's interesting because AI has changed so much. There's so much space to talk about it. And I've chatted with different people, I have not talked about accounting or taxes as a place where AI is impacting a field. And so I'm very curious about how the AI conversation played out in your other classes that are not ethics related. Like, how does a class on taxes or accounting look like when you're considering artificial intelligence? So what are you thinking about that?
So maybe let me start with why it's interesting to our students before we even get to the ethical piece of it. So my students are, many of them will go on to careers where they're going to be auditors at big accounting firms. Many of them will, go on to be tax nerds like me, but that's probably only 20% of the future CPAs that come through my classroom. But all of them either have the concern or should be concerned about what it means for their career. There's a lot of potential existential threats to what they do. The president came out a few weeks ago and said, "We no longer think we need quarterly earnings reports from companies. It would be fine if those just happened every 6 months." Imagine how many less public accountants we potentially need if all of a sudden you're only reporting half as much. My students have learned about the fact that so much of the work that I did starting out in 2001, coming out of school, is now not only done in pieces by AI, especially the work that we didn't necessarily want to do that was repetitive and time consuming, but this has been something that's been going on for 20 years, not necessarily AI taking those jobs, but figuring out that we don't necessarily need students from Flagler or Robert H. Smith School of Business to be coming out to do the most basic entry level accounting. And so we started to offshore that to cheaper places. And so the next stage of that is, what can you offshore? What can you automate? And what that means for our students is there's less overall work to be done. So how do I become someone that is so attuned to the technology that I'm able to jump into a career that has changed so much over 20 years? So I think for my students, it's understanding, how do they use the aspects of AI that can enhance their ability to do work quickly and effectively, but also how do they embrace it to develop new skills so that they are actually using it as a cognitive enhancement rather than just a work enhancement tool. And I'd love to talk more about what that looks like in the classroom. But yeah, it's something of critical concern to them. We certainly talk about the ethics, and maybe I'll leave on this tidbit. One of the first questions I ask my students in all my classes is to talk about their AI usage currently. It's part of our norming and process and getting to know each other. And in that first class, I have heard more and more over the past year, my students say some version of, "I'm trying to use AI less." And as someone who is very concerned about education and the future of education with AI, I'm very thankful that they're thinking about it so proactively. But I also am someone that is trying to prepare them as best I can for being in the future workforce. And to hear that, I really want to, over a semester, try to get them more excited about that aspect of AI that can really make them better professionals and better people, more interesting, more interested. Yeah.
I think this cognitive enhancement piece is so fascinating because if you use AI as a cognitive enhancement, you can get a lot farther than if you say, I'm scared of this technology and I don't want anything to do with it. And it sounds like your students maybe fall into somewhere on that spectrum of being and to push away from it and trying to embrace it. And that those pieces make a lot of sense to me. I'm wondering about, how do you teach in a way that leads to cognitive enhancement? And do you have advice for educators or education leaders in developing an environment where students are excited about the cognitive enhancement ability and there's less fear around students? I don't know. And I think the students cheating piece is also a big part of this conversation. And how do you build a culture that allows for that?
Yeah. I think it's a couple of things. Number one, I think it is, we don't have enough examples out there of people that are truly using it in ways that are pushing our minds forward. I still think we are a bit in the stage where, let's just use ChatGPT as an example, that people are using ChatGPT as a Google 2.0 rather than thinking about, how do I really creatively use this more as a part of me, to act more like a cyborg rather than having it be me here, machine here. And so part of it is just teaching them that, because I think this, trying to do it less, the students that have talked about that, it comes from a very thoughtful place. They are noticing in themselves that they are working less hard, they're being less creative, and the science backs them up. the science would tell you if you use AI in certain ways and on certain tasks, there is cognitive decline that we've seen in some of those students. And so it's really saying there are uses where you're going to want to use AI as an expedient that way, and it can be really helpful. But also, there's this much greater way to use it. And I want to show you how to do that. And I'll give you a couple examples. One of the things that we do early on to start to give those examples is this is actually one that's become very popular with a lot of my former colleagues and my former clients want to talk about this too. We set that first day of class to really, and I give a lot of credit to my teaching experts at University of Maryland that helped us get up to speed on great classroom techniques. We spend our first day just getting to know each other. But within a day of that, I get up on the whiteboard and I ask my students, we are going to be using a custom GPT in class this semester. It is yours. You are going to develop it. We are going to own it together. So I want you to tell me what are the types of tasks that we want this to be able to do, but also what do we want it to sound like, look like? How do we want it to work with us? If they need more prodding, what have you experienced with really great teaching assistants or professors or in a really great study group? How did that group interact? And Lydia, they're rarely saying something like they give us the right answer as fast as possible. It's usually that a really good TA or study partner is really great at creating an iterative process for learning. So they're not just giving you everything at once, they're giving it to you in pieces, they're pulling you along, they're forcing the learner to work with the AI. And so it's been really interesting to hear how all of them articulate that in a different way, but it almost always comes back to that. And you can see the faces of the students that are trying to use it less. You can see there's something there that they are like excited. Okay, I might get back into it to use it that way. And then, we talk a lot about tone. What do they want the tone to be like? Who do they learn from best? How do we want to train this on public domain so that they're getting the best, most accurate answers? And then, like, what kind of interactions can we program this to default to that's going to feel organic to them, that's going to feel fun to them, and that's going to help them learn? And by creating that custom GPT that way, number one, it's theirs. They own it. They help develop it. They ask for the things that are in it. And so that just creates a different level of responsibility. Because we've talked about it as a group, it helps level up those people that may not have even started yet to just sort of see, okay, first of all, this is a professor that wants us to do this and is in fact asking us to. So I have permission and I know I can hear in class what it might be good at. So I'm ready to jump into that a little bit.
So for your class, you have like one custom GPT that the whole class uses
Yeah.
together. It's not like each individual student has one. It's like as a group, we have one for this class that we use and we've normed about how this looks.
Yeah. That's right.
That's very cool. I think something I have talked with a lot of educators about is this new technology requires us to have conversations exactly like what you're talking about. Because if you, that, I think that's the magic of teaching anyway, when you can say, here's what we agree to as a group. We're excited about it. We're working towards something bigger than ourselves together. And when you know your students and you're able to do that, you can make incredible things happen. And we've seen teachers, I mean, you if you think back on your education experience, you can probably think of teachers who have created that kind of environment in the classroom just without this emerging technology that we have access to now. So it's so cool to hear your story and think about that example for other educators, a way to norm around the technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like the way that you said that. Really, what I'm trying to do, I'll just give my ethics class as an example. One of the things I struggle with as an educator, and I know my peers do as well, is how do we teach? Should we be teaching differently in a world where a lot of the information is democratized and at the tips of our students and future professionals' fingers? Should we be teaching differently in some way? And so for my classes, they are very Socratic. They're often very flipped, where students are in front of the room teaching. And so that idea that they are all teaming together to create this GPT is kind of a consistent theme with the rest of the class. Like they are judged not only on when they're the one at the front of the room presenting, or when they're the poor one in the seat that I'm calling on for the next 10 minutes. But we also set the standard that when you are the one presenting, you are meant to be taking care of everyone in that room. You are meant to be educating them, to be entertaining them. And that goes both ways. So as an audience member, what do you give back so that, that's a great cycle for everybody involved in that room. So teaching and looking at that custom GPT as a team exercise that they're involved in, that I'm involved in, I think is very consistent with the way that we at least have decided that we want to teach in an AI driven world. We need to all think about ways to be better teammates.
Okay, that I think that's very cool. And I'm so curious about how to replicate what you have done in your classroom in other classrooms. Do you have thoughts, things that you believe leadership in a university or K-12 setting could do?
I do. I think it depends on the atmosphere and like where you're coming from, what people's bent is already. My experience at the University of Maryland, and I feel very lucky about this, is that our leadership in the business school is very aware of AI and very focused on the way that it's changing the experience of our students now and in the future. And so we are devoting a ton of resources to that. And so it's really, there are no ideas that are too big. We need to figure out ways to just start and get people involved. But I think the first question I would ask if I was sitting down with an administrator is, what does AI competency look like for your students? Like, what's the end goal? What do we want out of that? And then we can decide, like, what's the right level of exposure and play. The other thing that tends to work for me in those circumstances, Lydia, and I think about it when I think about administrators that are working with much more junior populations than maybe mine, I give a lot of examples about how I use a custom GPT for things that are completely fun, unacademic. So before I'm getting up and writing on the board everyone's thoughts about how they want to interact with a class custom GPT, I tell them it's true. This is exactly what we did as a family to develop a vacation custom GPT. And the goal of that is so that I can just type in, because we've got somebody who needs to eat vegetables that is a vegetarian. We've got one person who must have really great coffee in the morning. We've got one person who needs a hike every day. And so if I just tell it, here are the individuals that are going on this trip and here's the time frame, it can design an entire trip for our family based on our specific interests and needs. And so, like, starting to give people these ideas on ways that they would use it outside of academia is really fun. And if I was in a school setting like that, that's the type of play I would have kids start doing. I was going to say, to make it clear to my students, going back before even the custom GPT is one of the exercises I had my tax class do, was I just, as a fun assignment, in the spirit of play, I said, what I want you to do is use any generative AI that you're comfortable using, Dolly, whatever. I want you to come up with a creative image that shows a particular tax subject in a way that would be convincing and interesting, like develop your own poster. And so I'm just ideating this in the room next door in my home. And at the time we had a 9 and a 10-year-old, two young women that are sitting with me just doing their own homework. And they said, "Wait, tell me more about what you want to do." And so I handed them my computer and they both developed their own tax posters. And so I could show my students, like, this is how easy it can be before you even start to like iterate. So anyway, I think for them, like, hopefully that's something they take away and can apply to a project at their school.
Right now, there's a lot of fear around generative AI in our country. There's a large swath of the population who feels afraid of the future that we have, and people do not believe that this technology is going to make our lives better. I think fun and play can be an antidote to fear. And so I love this idea of bringing in play and figuring out, like, how do we make this accessible? How do we make it understandable? How do we make it fun? Because we're not as scared of things that are fun as we are naturally. And so I love this idea of trying to figure out, how do you bring fun and joy into something that can feel like a black box, can feel scary, can feel like it's going to take your job. The beginning is just to try, to experiment, to play, so that then you can use it to be the cognitive enhancement that you talked about earlier in our
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. And whimsy are phenomenal educational tools. And the more that, we can use technology like AI to inspire those, I think it's phenomenal.
Amazing. And I have a little side question for you because I
Sure.
know you have this background as a tax expert and now you're an educator. And it's that from everything you've said, you're a very good educator and you're using principles that are really building an educational environment within, but alongside this emerging technology. What do you think? How did you end up being able to do that, to come from this corporate setting where you were very successful to the education setting where, I mean, that's a different environment and you've been able to build something really cool. H- How did you, how do you, thinking back, reflecting, how did you do that?
I would first give a lot of credit to our groups at Maryland's that help make us better teachers. And I leaned into that, but they were absolutely phenomenal, especially in those early years, about helping me understand how important building connection was with my students in terms of where the class goes from there. It first starts
Mhm.
with they've got to know how much you care before they care how much you know. Beyond that, though, I think coming from a professional services environment, which is really the way that I think about the job that I did at PricewaterhouseCoopers, it is really about serving others. And, as you and I talked about at the outset, it is listening and responding with empathy and taking into account other people's KPIs. For me, that part of it is very organic. In fact, that has probably made this an easier jump for me, this era of technology, because it allows me to focus my students on all those critical aspects that go beyond client service. It's how do I build a relationship? How do I have a point of view? How do I convince others of that view? And so I know this wasn't directly the question you asked, but it really makes me think about the idea that cognitive enhancement, we talked about that a bit. One of the areas I think that AI serves us best and makes us better humans is teaching us rhetorical technique, teaching us to be better conversationalists, debaters. And so one of the things that here's another way that I like to use it. And I definitely use this a lot to make me a better professor. So I have an hour and a half commute. On that commute, what I'll do is I will have already prepared my entire lecture for my tax class and I will get in the car with my AI advanced voice assistant, Maple, and I will say, Maple, I'm talking today about standard deductions and itemized deductions. You know a lot about my class because she's been trained at this point, but you know a lot about my students, 19 to 22 years old, highly educated, have been through an accounting curriculum. How do I come up with some examples on this topic that I'm talking about today that are very relevant to them? And so she might give me some examples. I say, that sounds great. Do you mind? I'm going to try to do that piece of the lecture while incorporating that new example that you gave me. And then, and I want you to be as critical as possible. Okay? I could also ask her to please interrupt me as I'm going if that's something I might anticipate might happen in the past. Like it's almost like a way to incorporate cognitive behavioral therapy into what you're doing. If you're trying to do something hard, like AI can be really good at training you for that stuff. So I'll spend a good hour of my ride doing some of that back and forth. And if she brings up something that I hadn't thought about, it's a great point to sort of press pause and go back to the much more manual way that we used to do things. That I used to do things when I was a kid, which was, I was almost carrying a dictionary and a thesaurus around my neck when I was reading. I can just ask her, I don't know that term you just used. Can you explain it to me more fully? What's the history of that? So that's what I mean when I say, there's ways to every day use it for cognitive enhancement. For me, I've used it that way as a teacher to help me get up to speed more quickly.
That's such a fun and useful way to use AI. I know lots of people have long commutes and being able to, the new voice aspects of AI are really incredible. Like the
Yeah.
things they're able to do and how well it can hear and respond in this very human-like way. It's pretty incredible if you haven't done that and you're listening, I recommend trying it. I think for folks who are maybe hesitant to use AI or who haven't, this is also a great way to start, is just sharing your ideas and having someone kind of debate you. I saw a great example that another leader in the AI space, her name's Renee Lazzi, and I hope to have her on a podcast sometime soon, but she has this example of using AI like Socrates and interacting more Socratically.
Yeah.
And so she
Yeah.
has these two examples where one is like a fourth grader saying, I'm writing about sharing. Can you help me write the introduction? And it writes it and they copy paste the introduction. And the other one is they have this kind of argument about whether or not sharing is always good and whether it's bad. And then there's this much more nuanced concept that this child is able to use because of that kind of back and forth. A lot of people talk about sycophancy with AI and how it will always tell you what you want. But if you instruct it to be more critical and you're more critical of it, then you can come up away with this sparring debate partner that makes you sharper before you have to talk to people.
I think that's great. I can't remember who it is. I think Professor Ethan Mollick talks about that in his book about creating 4 different editor personalities.
Mm.
He didn't want to completely give up the sycophancy. Like he likes every once in a while to, have somebody give him a pat on the back. But then 3 other personalities that are some, range of churlish and, will really like battle him back on things that he's doing. So I really like that.
I also was thinking about adult learning principles, and one
Yeah.
way adults learn is practice. I used to do a lot of professional development for teachers who would start coaching other teachers. And so, a lot of educators have a ton of experience educating, but they don't have experience with other adults. And so we would run these professional development experiences where we would have these teacher leaders practice coaching each other. So the first time they were coaching, it wasn't on the person they were coaching. And I think one kind of amazing use case with AI is to do that practice before you're in front of real people so that you're better for the people that you're with. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it allows you to kind of have your first at bat in this safe environment where you're practicing so that you can show up more prepared, more present, more confident with the people who you want to support and do your best by.
That's very well said. Yeah. I have a few like individual, I could call them clients, but they're more friends that I've sort of put myself out there and said, I would love to help the people that I really care about. If you're interested in this journey, let's just talk. And so it starts with a discussion around what are the things that are friction points for you in work, at home, whatever it is. And the piece that really stands out here, one of the questions I always ask is there a conversation with someone that's important that you've been avoiding having? Can we think about how to use AI to prepare you to move that conversation forward? Whether it's with a romantic partner or a kid or a coworker, how do we develop that right, your Socrates, whatever that personality is, so that you can have a realistic conversation and start to see around the corner? And like you said, Lydia, like it's a kindness to the other person because you are putting in the work so that you show up more present, more prepared. It's not about winning the conversation, but it's about helping you be more empathetic and seeing more sides to it.
Absolutely. You have shared so many great, useful ways of using AI, but have you had missteps along the way where you were using this technology and you were like, it didn't work out the way you wanted, or you feel like your results were worse because you used AI? Anything that's given you pause over the last few years?
Well, I think it depends on your frame of reference. If you were to ask my students, so I had a student last week, we're relatively early in the semester. So we just generated our class GPT and they are using it for the first time. They are testing some of their homework problems on it. And like it gave me the wrong answer, which is completely within my range of expectations as a professor. I know that it's going to give wrong answers. My students view this as a failure, or at least this student did. And I said, listen, one of the reasons we're doing this and that I'm very confident letting you, after you make a good faith first effort, use our class GPT to help guide you along and get there is because your next job, a lot of those jobs are called auditor, which means you are going in and your first job is reviewing someone else's work. How do you get that experience if you're not looking at someone else's work critically? So this is a really great chance for you to find you're going to go into a workplace where AI is going to be used pretty consistently. how are we going to find the errors in that if you're not used to looking for them? So let's talk about what it got wrong and why it got wrong, because a lot of times it's going to be the same reasons that humans get things wrong. So I don't think that's exactly on point for the misstep that you're looking for, but I am really excited about using failures and teaching them in a way that's a success. I don't expect that this is going to be perfect. And, I like to say to my students, the worst version of AI that you're going to use, you're using it right now. And now, right now again, and right now again, like it's only going to get better.
Your example makes me think about this human in the loop idea that I think Ethan Mullick coined. And you've talked a little bit online about keeping humans at the center of this work. And so I think that's an example of a way that you're doing this. But are there other examples or ways you think about how do you keep our human judgment central when you're using technology that has a lot of abilities?
Yeah, it's a great and deep question. I think it's part of our job as educators to understand, like, to talk with our students about what did the AI produce? And then what did you add to the situation? Or vice versa. Like, talk to me about your iterative process. If you used it to help you brainstorm, did you just use the ideas that it brainstormed, or did you branch off for those? Did you work
Mm,
together? So I think it is really about understanding process. And the more examples that we give to them of the types of things that we talked about where it can act as a cognitive enhancement tool rather than as a replacement tool is great. And if we see our students using it as a replacement tool, that might be enough in some circumstances. But oftentimes when I see students use it that way, there's an opportunity for additional learning and growth and talking to them about how do we take it from sort of good to great. So I know that's not as pointed, but I think it is a real chance every time our students come back with some sort of AI driven work, understanding how far they took it and whether or not there was more of an opportunity there. But that
mhm.
puts it on us educators to be kind of savvy on it ourselves and to play ourselves so that we're really practicing what we preach.
How do you know if a student does an assignment and they have just totally offloaded their thinking to generative AI? How do you recognize that and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it requires us educators to get students on their feet more and get them talking. I think it's really hard to defend, at least in the type of work that I ask my students to defend the work you've done unless you've done the good portion of it yourself.
Mm.
Maybe it's given you a really great idea that you followed through, but once your fellow students and once Professor Jefferson start really digging in, it becomes really obvious how much of this is yours and how much of the ownership is yours.
Sometimes I feel like the assessments that we give in education, K through college, are not necessarily authentic to the experiences students have when they're in the workforce. And so I think a lot of times when you're working, your work is not evaluated by the same criteria you might have experienced as a student. And a lot
Yeah.
of the way it's evaluated is your ability to just talk and explain what you've done, and that is a huge part of being a working adult, is being able to do something and then have a conversation about what you've done. And that isn't always how assessment looks like in a classroom. And it sounds to me like you are working hard to create opportunities for students to talk about their work more often.
Yeah, it's true. And I think one of the things that I found out pretty early on from interacting with those students and seeing what worked and what didn't is that is going to feel like a high stakes environment to especially our modern students. Getting up on your feet and talking about something in front of your peers and your professor is hard, right? Like it's hard going and doing in front of your partner and the rest of your team too. I get that. So I want them to feel like, how do I lower the stakes of this environment such that they are free to do their best work and also to screw up so that when they're not in the same room as Brian the professor, they're in the room with Brian the partner. This doesn't feel like the first time. And it doesn't feel so high stakes. I've been through this before. And I think that's a lot of that is just about practice. So one of the things that I've incorporated in all my classes is even the technical ones is not only do we have group presentations where they're very prepared, I also have them do individual elevator pitches, very short. Oftentimes they're choosing the topic and just give us like 2 minutes on the topic. Why is it important? Convince us of something, and then give us a little bit of time for Q&A. And then we all give a little bit of feedback. And so, just trying to take the dread out of the experience just by doing it. I realize like the more and more I say that, but I really do think that's important because my students, especially in the business school, I don't know how, what your experience was, but especially for accounting students, they don't have an opportunity in the current environment to like really get up on their feet and talk about their work a lot. And I think that's a little bit of a failure of us as educators to prepare them for what's next.
I think we keep coming back to this practice, ChatGPT, Gemini, generative AI, great tools to help you practice. And they enable more practice to happen in the classroom because you can do some of the mental practice beforehand, and then you can show up more ready to take an at bat at practicing talking to other people, which is scary and does feel high stakes. I have two more questions for you. If you're thinking about an education leader who wants to know where to begin with AI, whether they're a teacher, or maybe they're even someone who's not directly teaching but leading an educational institution, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I do have to go back to the starting point being, what do I want an AI proficient student to look like developing those markers, because I
Mhm.
think that's really going to inform. And then I would say for almost everyone, especially the younger the students are, really making that about play and fun. And you're giving them a framework to analogize going forward, things that they can use it to be more productive later. You know, if the family vacation GPT, you start to go, oh my gosh, that might be really good for this group project that I'm leading. Maybe we should have a custom GPT to make sure that we're all on the same page and working in the same way. So I think it is really developing the skills where people get used to playing it and having access first and foremost.
That dual mandate of play, but also a vision of what proficiency looks like. Do you have a short list of things that you believe an AI proficient student looks like?
Well, I will tell you, we are just starting that process as a group. I co-chair our teaching and education committee at University of Maryland and in the business school at the University of Maryland. And our first task is really to figure out what we want that to look like as a group. I think it's someone who constantly asks the question of, is there a way that this experience can be enhanced by using some sort of automation or artificial intelligence, no matter what the work product is? Is there a way to think about it that way? Whether or not we ultimately end up using it or it ends up helping, it's how do we develop people that are asking that question and showing
Right.
that curiosity?
It's a design question almost of how do we design our experiences to be augmented by technology. The new things are possible. And so I think it's an opportunity to be really creative about how we approach different tasks and experiences in life because there's new possibilities that weren't there before, and that's can be scary, but it can also be really exciting and an opportunity to, I don't know, to be creative and have fun.
Yeah, my wish for a student would be exactly what I do with my individual clients, which is we would sit down, talk through that list of things that they're working through, school challenges and personal things that they're thinking through, and then give them an overview of it. I'll just take ChatGPT, for example, an overview of some of the very specific tools and what could we apply deep research to? What could we maybe do this like Brian commuting plan type of, maple discussion for what would be a good use of trying agentic AI for the first time on something. And it really just gets them used to, have you written using the Canvas feature before? Could that be helpful as you're preparing your
Mhm.
next test? I mean, all of those are really a way I get excited because seeing people use the technology for the first time is a true light bulb. And so I'd love for our students to just have tried all of that stuff once so they have a framework.
Yeah. And having support alongside trying technology can be really helpful because there are folks who have a disappointing experience with technology and then write it off. And if you have some guidance, you can move past that and become more creative in your uses of what this can look like. I think just discovering use cases is such a ongoing exploration for different folks because the technology is so new and so powerful. So thinking about what do we do with it is a great question to explore alongside the groups that we engage with.
Can I give 5 seconds on what I would tell those people?
Yeah,
Like, so I just did this with my mom the other day, who is one of those, she is excited and she's willing to get into it, but very easily frustrated and is not her like primary proficiency. So what I had her do, it's very similar to what I'm doing with custom GPTs. I said, I want you to just write down on a piece of paper everything that is important to you, like that it makes you you. Then I want you to write on another piece of paper the biggest challenges that you're going through right now. I want you to take a picture of both of those. And then I want you to put it into the GPT, just upload it and say, please create a guide for me to try a number of features of ChatGPT to help push forward my favorite hobbies and enjoy them in a new way, or to help me solve the problems I'm currently working on that are all in these pictures I put together. And then I have her do that in deep research. And it gave her a 10-page guide that she's more used to reading long documents. She had her guide of GPT telling her how to better use GPT.
I love that. Brian, I
Yeah.
feel like you have like a good sense of crew. I feel like you have a good understanding of people and a good understanding of technology. I love the question of like, how can technology make us more human, make us more connected to each other? And I think that's a great way of you really listening to your mom and what her needs are, and then thinking about how can we, like, this is what I know about my mom. This is what she knows about herself. How can we take this to help her in the space where she's at? And I think that's a really cool example.
And importantly, now she owns it and I don't have to intercede.
Yeah, you're moving forward. I have one final question, and you could do both, but I'm curious about an idea or question about AI that is sitting with you right now, sparking hope, concern, curiosity. You could do positive and negative, or maybe it's just positive, but what is the thing that you keep thinking about?
Yeah. So, as a recovering CPA, I have to start with the skeptical and the negative. It's just in our nature. So I am very concerned about the future of work, particularly for new students coming out of university and what their role is, particularly in the space that I've come up working in. I don't have a great answer for how do you prepare for a career where you used to be at first doing the thing, preparing the financial statements, preparing the tax return in a future where I'm being told that's either going to be in large part done by artificial intelligence or offshore. And now you're going to be reviewing work when you've never actually done it yourself. That is a question that I have not heard great answers from the former firm that I worked for or any of our competitors yet are fully fleshed out. And I think it's really worth figuring out how do we create great professionals that are going to be excellent client service when they haven't come up in exactly the same way that I did. Now, I am filled with a ton of hope when I think about the fact that, oh my gosh, so many of those things that I was doing, I just felt like I was wasting brain cells and wasting time. And I'm not sure what I really did get out of those experiences. And if we can take that time and we're gaining from some of the offloading that we do to AI of tasks that are rote and that are not enhancing from a cognitive perspective. And we shift that time to ways where we're working on all these great client service, human elements. That excites me. But I
That's
don't think
very
that
cool.
playbook is fully written yet. And I think that's something my job right now, I think, is to keep pushing employers to tell me what that vision looks like and then from my perspective, continuing to prepare students so that they just know all the tools and they're ready once that challenge is in front of them. But the other thing too is I do believe that for the majority of folks, I don't know if AI is going to take your job. I do know that this maxim of people that really understand and are open to working in a new way and with artificial intelligence will be better fitted for the jobs of the future. So I just want to give my students the best chance for success because the story is still in progress.
Absolutely. We're in a moment of change, and I really appreciate your leadership in thinking about how you help our young people navigate that change. There's always uncertainty, but right now it feels like we have more uncertainty. And so being able to prepare them for work that's going to look different than it did in the past. It's a really important job.
I want Lydia for them to increasingly over the next couple of years view that challenge as opportunity and have the skills to be able to make that mental transition themselves.
What an inspiring conversation with Brian Jefferson. He is a true innovator in business education, and we thank him so much for sharing his on the ground insights from the university classroom. I have a few takeaways from our discussion that I want to share. First, we can move from fear to fun. Brian's approach shows how awe and whimsy can be powerful antidotes to AI anxiety, creating an environment where students are excited to experiment and build their skills. Second, we can look beyond automation to enhancement. Brian's experiences show the potential for AI to act as a cognitive partner, a tool that helps us practice difficult conversations, debate ideas, and sharpen our own thinking before we ever walk into the classroom or boardroom. And finally, we must prepare students for the future of work, not the past. This means training them not to just use AI, but to audit it, critique it, and keep the human in the loop, developing the critical judgment that will be invaluable in their careers. To learn more about Brian's work, check out the links in today's show notes at kinwise.org/podcast. And if your own school or district is ready to build a community for ethical and effective AI use, Kinwise offers everything from educator PD pilots to leadership labs that help you draft board-ready guidelines. Details and bookings are at kinwise.org/pilot. And finally, if you found value in this podcast, the best way to support the show is to subscribe, leave a quick review, or share the episode with a friend. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay Kinwise.